Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy Preston here, and this is my post-fight reaction to Oleksandr Usyk stopping Daniel Dubois, and I believe the fifth round it said in the rematch against Oleksandr Usyk, and shit like that, like that's like I'm just gonna go off of that, and shit like that it was the fifth round, and stuff like that. You guys can just go and check, and shit like that. But I believe it was the fifth round. I know it wasn't like it wasn't towards like the later part of the fight. It was kind of like ending the early half of the fight. That's when Oleksandr Usyk knocked out Dubois. But before I even get to anything, bro, Daniel Dubois, bro, like I still have massive respect for Daniel. He still is a really good fighter, but that chin is so fucking suspect, bro. Like literally, like I am just saying, like it's like the most like delicate glass on the planet, bro. Like literally, like the most delicate glass, bro. And shit like that. Like not no ordinary glass, like the most delicate glass. Like literally, like his chin almost reminds me of Amir Khan a little bit. You know what I mean? And it's like that's gonna be a downfall for him and shit like that because it's like, you know, before that happened, it's like he was doing well. He was boxing well, and shit like that. Like hitting Oleksandr Usyk with some big shots. They both were going at it, and they both were winning some rounds. Like there was rounds where Dubois was winning, rounds where Oleksandr Usyk was winning before that happened. But it's just like that chain cannot last, dude. It's like, and the thing is that like I kind of just knew, like, right when, like, Dubois was just consistently getting hit by Oleksandr Usyk, he kept, like, freezing. You know what I mean? Like, he kept freezing to the hits. You know what I mean? And shit like that. It's like he didn't react well to the hits. So I was like, it was a matter of time until Oleksandr Usyk was gonna find that soft spot because Oleksandr Usyk, the one thing that I was observing in the fight, and shit like that, is that he was literally hitting the equilibrium every single time on Dubois. So that's why he kept getting stumbled, because every single time he kept just breaking him down slowly and slowly. I mean, basically just broke him down slowly with punches, to the temple, and shit like that, and then eventually he just pressed the gas and then just stopped Daniel Dubois, because he already stopped him in the last fight, but then he did the same thing again, and shit like that. The last one was like, I would say both fight. If you look at it, and stuff like that, both fights were literally the same way, and shit like that. Like I would say that the first fight was a little bit more competitive, but it's not much different to just say that like this fight was more competitive or anything like that. Like it was like the same exact fight, like the first fight. You know what I'm saying? But that's the thing and shit like that. But like, you know, Daniel Dubois is a really good fighter. Cause shit, I mean, he knocked out Anthony Joshua very quick too. And shit like that. Which I was heavily going for Anthony Joshua. In that fight. Like I just like. I just didn't think that Daniel Dubois like did enough to defeating Anthony Joshua, and shit like that. I mean, like he had enough, but it just more of like Joshua was more complete as a boxer. It's like, and he had power and he knew how to squabble. So it's just like most people went for Joshua in that fight, and shit like that. And like that's the thing and shit like that. And he just went and he beat Anthony Joshua, and shit like that, and he beat Jarrell Miller too. So I mean, he has some notable wins, Daniel Dubois, and shit like that. But it's just like when he could get knocked out very easily though, and shit like that. It's like I'm just saying, bro, and shit like that. It's like unless it like if you know how to slow him down and break him down with punches, and shit like that, and know how to really put the power in on Dubois, like he can get knocked out, bro. And shit like that. I've watched so many of Daniel Dubois fights. Ever since he's never even been to the States before. And shit like that. He's only been to the States like once. And that was when he fought on the Jake Paul undercard. When he fought Tyron Woodley or whatever, and shit like that, he went to the States, and shit like that, and then he fought but he fought like this and honestly, the one dude the one guy that Dubois was fighting, and shit like that. I think I was going against Dubois in that fight or something, and Dubois just destroyed that dude, and shit like that. And I was promoting the fight on top of that too, and shit like that. I was promoting that fight, and shit like that. And I think I remember I was picking and it was like this one Mexican dude and shit like that, and I picked him over Dubois, but then he got stopped really. I think it was like the first round he got knocked out by Dubois, and shit like that. So Dubois shows that, like, he will show that he still is that guy, and shit like that, but it's just that chin, man, and shit like that. That chin is suspect, bro. But yeah, man, and I'm just saying though, and shit like that. But also, I looked and officially, yes, it was the fifth round that Oleksandr Usyk stopped Dubois. I didn't look at I was just tunnel vision. I only saw the second what happened in this fight, not the first fight. But yeah, and stuff like that, But yeah, man, and shit like that, But like Usyk, I just don't know who's gonna be able to beat Usyk. Like, it's just like the only person that really can have the ability to beat Usyk, and shit like that is Tyson Fury. That's the only person. Well, I mean, right now, there's a lot of up and coming like Fabio Wardley, Moses Atama, Terra Moana, and stuff. But I'm pretty sure that Usyk would still beat those guys, and shit like that, but the only guy that would really be able to actually it could go really either way, and shit like that, overall, stylistically, I'm just saying and shit like that, it's Tyson Fury. And they're looking at possibly having a trilogy match, and shit like that, because right now Usyk is he's 2-0 against Tyson Fury, and shit like that. But Fury wants to just have a redemption to at least beat Usyk, but that's what I was saying though, like I knew that Tyson Fury, I don't know if I said this before or not, and shit like that. I don't think I did on camera, but I was already telling myself and shit like that Fury's gonna only be in retirement for a little bit, just so then he could be able to just enjoy life a little bit, and then because once that boxer hits, he's going back into boxing, and shit like that. That boxer mindset, and that's the thing and shit like that. And overall, I would love to see that fight, and shit like that between another fight. But I wonder if it's just the thing is though that kind of kills the vibe. That's a really big fight. I really wish they could come over to the States, but it's just more it's just at the same time that's not how it works. Unless if the money talks, and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? But I hope that the money does talk, because it's just more of Tyson Fury versus Oleksandr Usyk. Usyk needs to he's been unifying. He's been basically unifying all of those belts and shit like that. Not really he's been basically having all of those belts, and all those sanctioned bodies for so long. Now he's undisputed. He needs to fight in the States now, and shit like that. Oleksandr Usyk, and shit like that. Just like with Inoue, he been getting all of his fame over in Japan. Look what he's doing now. He's starting to fight in the U.S. Usyk needs to do the same thing. So just if they fight each other, I would like to see that fight in the States, and shit like that. But it's just fighters, it's just it's a different ball game when they fight over here, and shit like that. Because especially with Usyk, he gets more of the benefit of the doubt with like over at where he's at of fighting, because Great Britain, they love the shit out of Oleksandr Usyk, and shit like that, like Saudi Arabia, they like literally, it's the only place that don't really give a fuck about all of that, like all of like like favoritism and shit like that, and shit. The US, we still play that shit, and shit like that, but like at the same time, we still put controversy onto fighters, like and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? And especially with Usyk, if he fights over here and shit like that, it's like, man, dude, like it's like different judges, different ball game. Let's see what he's gonna do with Tyson Fury, and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? Because Tyson Fury wants that fight bad. And if he wants that fight bad, he's going to do what he can do to get that fight, and shit like that with Oleksandr Usyk, and shit like that, and shit, like, both of their fights were good fights, and shit like that overall, and shit like that. Fury fought good, fought well, and fought really hard where Oleksandr Usyk had to really use a lot of strategy to beat Tyson Fury, and shit like that. But then Fury, like, I thought he did enough to winning the first fight, and shit like that. Or, like, I don't know, man. I wouldn't say he won. And, like, I would say like this, and shit like that. It's like, if I would give it to somebody, I would give it to Tyson Fury. But overall, like, I couldn't understand why, like, it would have went to Usyk because of those brutal knockdowns and how he was winning all of the later rounds and shit. Like, he based, like, Tyson Fury was on his tippy toes to not getting knocked out in that fight, and shit like that against Oleksandr Usyk. Hold on, guys. And I'm just saying, though, it's shit like that, So it's like, I just say that would make a good fight, and that should definitely happen. For Daniel Dubois, I feel like there's two fights where I would confidently like to see him fight, and shit like that, and that's either to fight to get that fight back with Joseph Parker, because they were supposed to fight each other before, and shit like that. But then that fight got postponed. Martin Bacoli was the replacement. Got knocked the fuck out by Joseph Parker, and shit like that, And it was like it's like he just chipped his like knuckle, like it was a perfect just shot on his knuckle, and it just bounced right off of his, like, yeah, it was a big time knockout. He's knocked out Martin Bacoli, and shit like that, and like that's the thing and shit like that. Heavyweight boxing, bro, is like interesting as fuck. Like, I love promoting it and I love watching it because Oleksandr Usyk isn't really a knockout artist, but any heavyweight is gonna be able to put somebody to sleep because like they're a big man and shit like that. It's like that's the thing and shit like that. It's like big men naturally will have big man power, so it's like they know how to set up that power. So it's more common for things like this, like knockouts, to happen in the heavyweight division. But I'm just saying that's the most interesting, in my opinion, is the heavyweight division. Like not even like the cruiserweight division you see knockouts like that. Like only the heavyweight division you could just see knockouts like this, and shit like that. And Usyk, he was beating up everybody in the cruiserweight division. That's why he had to go up to heavyweight. But then now, like, and shit like that, now he's in heavyweight. He's just destroying everybody. But he's now a pretty natural heavyweight. Back in the day, he was a little small for a heavyweight and shit like that. But then he started just getting more bulkier, and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? But, excuse me, but that's the thing and shit like that, But, yeah, but the fight with him and Joseph Parker, Dubois and Joseph Parker, it's like that fight should definitely happen, like that's, because it's like, because that was a really good, highly anticipated fight that I wanted to watch, because you know, whoever won, that would be a really big stepping stone for them, you know, because I mean, an Usyk loss isn't really gonna do anything, you know, because I mean, if you face Usyk, you already have to be pretty fucking good already, you know, and shit like that. So it just overall, like, that didn't really count. Like, that fight right there will solidify, like, you know, who's better than each other first and foremost, and who deserves to get into the higher rankings, you know. But then another fight and shit like that, you know, is a rematch with Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois, you know, and shit like that, you know, because I always felt like Dubois needed that redemption against Joe Joyce, you know, and shit like that, you know, and if Joe Joyce, like, it can come back and shit like that, fight, you know, win some fights and shit like that, look good again, which I know he will, and shit like that, time comes wisdom, you know, and shit like that, you know, like, that fight can happen, you know, and shit like that between Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois, you know, and shit like that. And stylistically, I think that fight's gonna be the same type of match, but you know, I don't know who's gonna win, you know, and shit like that because I mean, like, because Dubois obviously can know the weaknesses of Joe Joyce, and he can definitely expose that, knowing what Daniel Dubois is about. You know, and shit like that, you know, and that's the thing and shit like that. But at the same time, you know, Joe Joyce could still do good with his distance managing, utilizing a consistent motor with his punches and utilizing a consistent jab, keeping Dubois at range, you know, utilizing, you know, like 1-2 combos, you know, or just utilizing a bunch of combos with straight punches, mixing it up with other punches, like, overall, that would be a good fight, you know, and shit like that between Dubois and Joe Joyce, you know, and shit like that. Cause that's the thing and shit. Cause Dubois is still a good fighter. Cause like I said, you know, like, the fight was competitive all the way until Usyk knocked out Dubois, you know, and shit like that. You know, I mean, everybody can have their own but it just, you know, I'm pretty sure it's clear that Dubois was making that fight pretty competitive and was winning rounds and honestly it was kind of an even fight, you know, and shit like that. Like, Usyk won the round, but like, and shit like that, so it was like 3-2. You know, and shit like that, or it was like, or no, it was like actually 2-2, but then he won that round, and then it was 3-2, you know, and shit like that, obviously. But so it was an even fight. Like, I'm pretty sure most people are gonna say that was an even fight. I don't know how it was an even fight, you know, and shit like that before that knockout. You know what I mean? So he didn't get obliterated by Usyk. It's just his chin just constantly keeps getting exposed, you know, and shit like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, you know. But you know, but yeah, you know, and stuff like that, you know, so that's the thing, man, you know, and shit like that, you know, it's like, yeah, you know, and shit, you know, but yeah, man, and shit like that, but that is it for me, you know, and shit like that, you know. What's next for Usyk, I think should be, you know, honestly, Tyson Fury. That's the only thing that really I feel like makes sense. And for Dubois, I think it should be either Joseph Parker, try to get that fight, you know, back in the, or run it back, you know, with Joe Joyce, you know, and shit like that. I always put Joe Joyce in there, you know, and shit like that, you know, and shit with Dubois, you know, and shit like that, you know, cause I mean, he beat Dubois. That's one of Dubois' losses, you know, and shit like that, you know. That's the person who landed Dubois' first loss was Joe Joyce. So yeah, you know, and shit like that. So Usyk, Tyson Fury, Dubois, Joseph Parker, or Joe Joyce, you know, and shit like that, you know. Between Joe Joyce and Joseph Parker, though, overall, like, I want to see Joe Joyce, like, fight other fighters before that kind of fight, you know, and shit like that, you know, because I mean, he hasn't fought in a minute, you know, Joe Joyce, you know, as far as what I've seen, you know, and shit like that, you know, like, you know, the odds are going to be incredibly in favor of, like, of Dubois. So I feel like he's, in general, I feel like he should be more ready for that fight, you know, with other fights. And yeah, so with that right there, Joseph Parker is definitely a ready fighter. So overall, I would like to see Dubois versus Joseph Parker, you know, and shit like that. So between both of those, between Parker and Joe Joyce, I would like to see the fight between Dubois and Joseph Parker, you know, and shit like that, you know. But yeah. But thank y'all for watching this video. Again, I'm really trying to get to 100 subscribers, and shit like that, and the one thing though, and shit like that, like I love y'all, but it's just more of like I had like 200 some views on the Pacquiao fight, and stuff like that, but then none of y'all, and shit like that, like 200 and some of y'all watch this video and shit like that, or at least a good percentage of y'all, I'm pretty sure, at least watch the video, and shit like that, fully, but without subscribing, and stuff like that. And I've been really pleading for y'all, and shit like that, with mercy, or not with mercy, but like I've been really pleading with y'all for y'all to subscribe, and shit like that. It ain't hard, it's just a button, and shit like that. If you ain't signed in, and shit like that, I mean, I can understand that, and shit like that if you're not signed in, but sign in. It ain't hard, and shit like that. Just get an email, whatever, sign in, then subscribe, and shit like that. You know what I mean? But yeah. But thanks for y'all for watching this video. Make sure you guys get me to 100 subscribers. And I'm Preston. Peace out, y'all.